Ambassador Kyle Bennett stood before the assembled Galactic Council, his hands clasped calmly in front of him. He looked at the hundreds of representatives from across the galaxy, species of every shape and size, all of them watching him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Members of the Council, Bennett began, his voice warm and friendly. I have been asked to address the military restrictions placed upon humanity. I want to make something very clear. We accept these restrictions willingly and completely. We never wanted to fight in the first place. The council chamber remained silent. Every representative leaned forward, trying to understand how the same species that had threatened galactic genocide could now speak so casually about peace. Humans have a saying, Bennett continued. The best victory is the one that never requires fighting. We would rather build than destroy. We would rather create than kill. We would rather make friends than enemies. The border conflict was the worst moment in our brief galactic history, and we sincerely hope it never happens again. Professor Kelthus paused the recording and looked at his students. Ambassador Bennett went on to speak for 2 hours about human culture, human values, and human hopes for the future. He convinced the council that humanity's acceptance of the restrictions was genuine, but what he did not say was perhaps more important than what he did say. The professor brought up classified analysis of Bennett's speech, prepared by Council Intelligence Services. Human psychology experts noted that Bennett never apologized for what happened during the border conflict. He expressed regret that it was necessary, but he did not say it was wrong. He did not promise that humans would never do such things again. He simply said they hoped they would never have to. Zoreth felt a chill run through his body. The distinction was subtle but important. The humans were not promising to change. They were promising to avoid situations where their true nature would be revealed again. Over the next 200 years, humans became model members of the galactic community, Professor Kelthus said, bringing up images of human achievements. They contributed to science, art, philosophy, and engineering. They built beautiful cities on dozens of worlds. They formed friendships with every species they encountered. They became known as peaceful, helpful, and creative people. The display showed human scientists working alongside alien colleagues making breakthrough discoveries. It showed human artists creating stunning works that combined their culture with alien traditions. It showed human engineers designing incredible structures that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Human doctors developed treatments for diseases that had plagued other species for generations. The professor continued. Human teachers educated thousands of young aliens in science and mathematics. Human traders established fair and profitable relationships with hundreds of worlds. By every measure, humans became exactly what the galaxy hoped they would be. Vrika's crystalline form brightened with hope. So the restrictions worked? Humans became peaceful? Professor Kelthus's expression became somber. Humans were always peaceful, Vrika. That is what you must understand. The humans who fought in the border conflict were peaceful people forced into violence. Commander Jake Morrison never wanted to be a soldier. He wanted to teach children. Lieutenant Amy Clark wanted to develop medicine. They only became warriors when they believed their species was threatened. He brought up current profiles of humans living throughout the galaxy. There were millions of them now, spread across hundreds of worlds. They worked in every field imaginable: medicine, engineering, art, agriculture, science, trade. They were neighbors, colleagues, and friends to countless aliens. But the council never forgot what these peaceful people were capable of. The professor said quietly. Security protocols were established. Human ships are monitored more carefully than any other species. Human communications are occasionally reviewed. Not because humans have done anything wrong in 2 centuries, but because the council remembers what they did in just 4 days. A new display appeared, showing a classified council security report from the previous year. The students read it with growing unease. The report detailed how council intelligence had discovered a private human company developing advanced propulsion systems that could be used to move asteroids more efficiently than current technology allowed. The company was designing this for mining operations, Professor Kelthus explained. Perfectly legal, perfectly peaceful. But council security immediately recognized the military implications. The same technology that could move ore-bearing asteroids to processing facilities could also move those asteroids toward planetary targets. The report showed that council representatives had met with the human company. They had not demanded the company stop their research. They had not accused humans of preparing for war. They had simply reminded the company about the military restrictions and suggested that such powerful technology should perhaps be developed in partnership with Council. Oversight, the human executives had immediately agreed. They had welcomed Council participation and had been completely cooperative. The whole situation had been resolved peacefully and professionally. But the security analyst noted something interesting in their report. Professor Keltis said, highlighting a section of the document. The human executives were not surprised by the Council's concerns. They had apparently expected this response. One of them even made a joke about it, saying that humans could not move a rock without someone worrying they were planning to drop it on a planet. The students found this funny, and some of them made sounds of amusement. But Professor Keltis did not smile. The analyst concluded that humans are fully aware of how they are perceived, he said. They know the galaxy is afraid of them. They understand that their peaceful behavior over 2 centuries has not erased the memory of the border conflict, and they find the situation somewhat amusing. Another report appeared, this one about a human comedy show that had become popular on several worlds. One episode featured jokes about the military restrictions, with human comedians making light of the galaxy's fear of them. One comedian, a woman named Sophie Grant, had a famous routine that the professor played for the class. She stood on stage, addressing an audience of both humans and aliens, her expression innocent and cheerful. "So apparently we humans are scary," Sophie said with exaggerated surprise. "Who knew? I mean, I look in the mirror every morning and I just see someone who needs coffee, not a terrifying warrior. But the galaxy sees me and thinks, oh no, she might plan 27 steps ahead and use psychological warfare on me." The audience laughed, and Sophie continued. "I went to buy groceries last week, and I swear the Thalaxian cashier was nervous. I wanted to say, relax, I am just buying space milk and bread. I am not calculating the optimal strategy to conquer your planet using baked goods as weapons." More laughter. Sophie smiled and shrugged. "Though if I did use bread as a weapon, I would probably target the supply chains first, create logistical problems, and... Wait, no, see? This is why they do not let us play laser tag with other species anymore." Professor Keltis stopped the recording. Humor is how humans deal with uncomfortable situations. They joke about being dangerous because it makes the topic less threatening. But notice what Sophie said. Even in her comedy routine, she acknowledged that humans do think strategically, do plan ahead, do consider tactical implications of everything. She just presented it as something funny, rather than something frightening. The professor brought up one final document, marked with the highest classification level. "This is the most recent Council psychological evaluation of humanity, completed just last year. I will read you the key conclusion." He read aloud, his voice steady but grave. "After 2 centuries of observation, we can confirm that human nature has not changed. Humans remain capable of the same actions they demonstrated during the border conflict. The difference is that they have no reason to demonstrate these capabilities. They are content, prosperous, and secure. However, if humanity were ever to face an existential threat again, we assess with high confidence that they would respond exactly as they did before. The military restrictions must remain in place indefinitely, not as punishment but as prevention." The lecture hall was completely silent. Every student now understood the truth about humans. They were not reformed warriors who had learned to be peaceful. They were peaceful people who could become terrifying warriors if necessary, then return to being peaceful again afterward. "Let me show you one more thing," Professor Keltis said, bringing up a recent video. "This is from 3 months ago during a cultural exchange program. The video showed human children, no more than 10 years old, participating in a sporting event with alien children. They were playing a simple game involving catching and throwing a ball. The human children were laughing, helping their alien teammates, celebrating together when they scored points. These children have never known war," the professor said. "They have grown up in a peaceful galaxy where humans are accepted and valued. They are innocent, joyful, and kind." He paused the video on a frame showing a young human girl with blonde hair, her face bright with happiness as she hugged a Krelian teammate. Professor Keltis dimmed the lights in the lecture hall and brought up a new series of displays. These were not battle recordings or strategic maps. These were scientific reports, psychological evaluations, and biological studies. The students settled into their seats, confused about why their military history class had suddenly shifted to biology. To understand why the Council made their decision about humanity, you must understand what humans are, the professor began. We sent our best scientists to study them. We needed to know if all humans were like Commander Morrison and Lieutenant Clark, or if these were exceptional individuals. The first display showed human evolutionary history. The students saw primitive humans hunting on the African plains of Earth, chasing prey for hours under the hot sun. They saw humans adapting to every environment on their planet, from frozen tundra to burning deserts. Humans evolved as persistence hunters, Professor Kelthus explained. Most predators on Earth are faster and stronger than humans. But humans have two advantages. They can run for incredibly long distances without stopping, and they can plan ahead. They would chase prey until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. Sometimes this took hours. Sometimes it took days. But humans would never give up. Zorith watched footage of modern humans running marathons, races that lasted for hours. The humans looked tired, but they kept moving, their faces set with determination. It seemed like torture, yet they did it willingly, even for recreation. This shaped their psychology, the professor continued. When a human decides something is worth doing, they will continue until they succeed or die trying. They do not know how to quit. This is not a choice for them. It is built into their biology. Vrika's crystalline form flickered thoughtfully. But Professor, many species are persistent. That alone does not explain their behavior in warfare. You are correct. Professor Kelthus agreed. Persistence is only part of the answer. The other part is more disturbing. He brought up brain scans showing human neural activity. The images highlighted areas of the brain that dealt with empathy, morality, and social bonding. Then he showed what happened to those same areas during combat situations. Humans have strong empathy under normal circumstances, the professor explained. They form deep emotional bonds. They care for their families, their communities, even strangers. But they have a mental switch that can turn off this empathy when they perceive a threat to their survival. The students watched as the brain scans changed. During peaceful activities, the empathy centers glowed brightly. During simulated combat scenarios, those same areas went dark, while other regions associated with problem-solving and tactical thinking lit up. They can choose to stop seeing enemies as people, Professor Kelthus said softly. When that switch flips, humans become incredibly efficient at killing. They feel no guilt, no hesitation, no remorse. The enemy becomes simply an obstacle to be removed, like a boulder blocking a path. Crix made a sound of disbelief. But that would make them psychopaths. How can an entire species function if they are all capable of becoming emotionless killers? That is the remarkable part, the professor said. They are not psychopaths. After the conflict ends, the switch flips back. They return to their normal empathetic state. Commander Morrison now teaches young children. He is known for his patience and kindness. Lieutenant Clark works in medical research, trying to cure diseases. Captain Turner bakes bread and gives it away to his neighbors. The display showed recent footage of these former warriors in their current lives. Morrison was shown helping a young student with homework, his face gentle and encouraging. Clark was in a laboratory, carefully working to develop medicine for a rare illness. Turner stood in his bakery laughing as he handed pastries to customers. They are not monsters, Professor Kelthus said. That is what makes them so frightening. They are normal people who can become monsters when necessary, then become normal people again when the danger passes. They carry no trauma from what they did. They feel no need for redemption. They simply did what needed to be done and moved on with their lives. A new display appeared, showing psychological interviews with multiple human soldiers. The Council, evaluators had tried to understand how humans could commit such acts without psychological damage. One soldier, a man named Carl Foster, was asked if he felt guilt about killing civilians during the conflict. His response was recorded. I felt terrible about it at the time. I still think it was a horrible thing. But they were helping to supply the fleet that was trying to kill us. I made the choice to shoot them, and I would make the same choice again if I had to. Sometimes there are no good options, only less bad ones. Another soldier, a woman named Dana Price, was asked how she could return to normal life after the violence. She replied, "War was a job that needed doing. Now it is done, so I do a different job. I do not sit around thinking about the past. I live in the present and plan for the future. That is what humans do." Professor Keltis paused the interviews. The council psychologists were baffled. In most species, committing atrocities causes permanent psychological damage. Soldiers from other species who have killed civilians often cannot function in normal society afterward. But humans can compartmentalize their experiences. They put the war in one mental box and their civilian life in another box, and they never let the boxes mix. "Is that even possible?" Vrika asked, her crystalline body pulsing with confusion. "For humans, apparently yes," the professor answered. "They have what their own psychologists call emotional resilience. They can experience terrible things, process those experiences, and continue living functional lives. This makes them extraordinarily dangerous because they can commit acts that would psychologically destroy most other species, and they will suffer no lasting effects." He brought up more data, this time showing human innovation during the conflict. The students saw how quickly humans had adapted Draxian technology, modified their own weapons, and developed new tactics. "Humans have another trait that makes them unique," Professor Keltis said. "They are incredibly creative problem solvers. Most species develop technology slowly, building on established foundations. Humans will try anything if they think it might work. They have a saying, 'Necessity is the mother of invention.'" The display showed engineer Paul Grant's notes from the conflict. In his own handwriting, he had sketched out designs for modified weapons, adapted shields, and entirely new systems based on captured Draxian technology. The drawings were crude but brilliant, showing intuitive understanding of principles that should have taken years to learn. Grant had no formal education in Draxian engineering, the professor explained. He simply looked at the equipment, understood how it worked, and figured out how to make it better. This took him 37 hours. Our own engineers estimate it should have taken 37 months, minimum. Another example appeared, showing Lieutenant Clark's tactical innovations. She had invented entirely new formations and strategies during active combat, adapting to Draxian responses in real time. Her battle plans showed no adherence to traditional military doctrine. She simply did what worked. "Humans do not follow rules unless those rules help them achieve their goals," Professor Keltis said. "They will break any tradition, ignore any convention, and discard any principle if doing so gives them an advantage. This is not because they are immoral. It is because they see rules as tools, not as sacred laws." He showed the students human military academies on Earth, where young humans trained for warfare. The instructors taught standard tactics and strategies from galactic military theory. But they also taught something else: how to break those same rules when necessary. One instructor, a human named Helen Pierce, was recorded telling her students, "Learn the rules so you understand what the enemy expects you to do. Then do something else. Surprise is your greatest weapon. Unpredictability is your strongest defense. The moment your enemy thinks they understand you, change your pattern." Professor Keltis looked around at his students. "Every species in the galaxy fights wars according to certain principles. We have honor codes, we have rules of engagement, we have established tactics that we teach and follow. Humans have no such limitations. They will use any tactic, any strategy, any method if it leads to victory." The display showed a comparison chart. On one side were typical galactic warfare casualties, military losses versus civilian losses, infrastructure damage versus preservation, acceptable versus unacceptable tactics. The ratios were fairly consistent across all species, showing that warfare followed predictable patterns. On the other side were human warfare statistics. The ratios made no sense. Humans would sacrifice their own infrastructure to kill enemies. They would target civilians if those civilians supported the enemy war effort. They would destroy resources rather than let them be captured. They followed no pattern because they had no pattern. The Council's military analysts tried to develop a strategy for fighting humans, Professor Keltis said. They wanted to know how to counter human tactics if it ever became necessary. After 6 months of study, they concluded it was impossible. A new report appeared on the display, marked with the highest classification level. The students leaned forward to read the summary. The lecture hall was completely silent as Professor Kelthis prepared to show the recording. Every student leaned forward, barely breathing. They sensed that what they were about to witness would change their understanding of warfare forever. This message was sent to both Admiral Krell-Tok and the Galactic Council, the professor said. It was transmitted openly with no encryption. Commander Morrison wanted everyone to hear it. The display showed Jake Morrison sitting calmly in his command chair. His uniform was clean, his face freshly shaved. He looked like he was about to discuss a simple business transaction, not the fate of billions of lives. Admiral Krell-Tok, Morrison began, his voice steady and emotionless. You have threatened to destroy New Terra from orbit. I understand your frustration. We have not fought the way you expected. We have not followed your rules. I want to make sure you understand the consequences before you proceed. Morrison paused and looked directly into the camera. His brown eyes showed no anger, no fear, no hatred. They were empty of emotion, and that emptiness was more terrifying than rage would have been. If you bombard New Terra, every human on that world will die, Morrison continued. That is approximately 5 million people, including 3 million civilians. You will have committed an act of genocide against humanity. At that point, we will consider all rules of warfare to be meaningless. The students watching in the lecture hall felt a collective chill. They knew what was coming, but hearing it directly from the human commander made it real in a way that second-hand accounts never could. We have already positioned assets throughout Draxian space, Morrison said. If New Terra falls, 12 Draxian colony worlds will experience kinetic bombardment within 48 hours. We have moved asteroids into position near each target. They are large enough to cause extinction-level events. Your colonies contain approximately 18 billion Draxians. They will all die. Admiral Krell-Tok's response appeared on a split screen. His scaled face showed shock and disbelief. You are bluffing. You could not have positioned such weapons without our detection. Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Lieutenant Clark, please send Admiral Krell-Tok the current coordinates of asteroid 77 Alpha. Lieutenant Amy Clark appeared in the corner of the screen, her red hair pulled back, her fingers moving across her console. Coordinates transmitted, sir. The display showed Draxian sensor data. Their instruments had just detected a massive asteroid in an unusual orbit near their fourth colony world. The asteroid had been invisible to them until the humans revealed its position. Its trajectory, if continued, would impact the planet with enough force to kill everything on the surface. We have 11 more, Morrison said simply. Would you like the coordinates for those as well? Professor Kelthis paused the recording. The Galactic Council went into emergency session immediately. They had to verify whether the human threat was real. Within 3 hours, Council survey ships had confirmed the presence of all 12 asteroids. The humans had somehow moved massive objects into position without anyone noticing. Zorith raised one of his 4 hands. Professor, how did they move asteroids without being detected? That requires enormous energy expenditure. They used slow, low-power propulsion over many weeks, the professor explained. They began moving the asteroids before the conflict even started, apparently as a contingency plan in case war broke out. The humans were planning for the worst-case scenario before anyone else even knew there would be a conflict. The students absorbed this information with growing dread. The humans had been preparing for total war while still engaging in peaceful trade and diplomacy. It suggested a level of paranoia and forward planning that seemed almost inhuman. But the asteroids were only part of the message. Professor Kelthis continued, restarting the recording. What came next was even worse. On the screen, a Galactic Council mediator appeared, a Vorlaxian diplomat named Selthis. Commander Morrison, you are threatening the lives of billions of innocent civilians. This is beyond any acceptable conduct of warfare. You would be committing genocide on a scale never seen in galactic history. Morrison's expression did not change. Yes, I would. If you allow the Draxians to commit genocide against humanity, then humanity will respond with overwhelming force against those who threaten us. We will ensure that our extinction comes at such a terrible cost that no species will ever threaten us again. Lieutenant Clark spoke up from her station, her voice as calm as Morrison's. I have prepared a data package for the Council. Transmitting now. The Council chambers erupted in chaos as they received the data. Professor Kelthus showed the students what the package contained, and the lecture hall filled with gasps and sounds of shock. The humans had identified the homeworlds of every species in the Galactic Council, the professor said. They had mapped military installations, population centers, and infrastructure weaknesses. They had calculated exactly how to cause maximum damage to each civilization. All of this in just 4 days of conflict. The data package showed Earth's moon, which the humans called Luna. Hidden facilities had been constructed there, disguised as scientific research stations. Those facilities contained missiles, each one powerful enough to destroy a city. There were thousands of them. We have targeted every major population center in Council space, Morrison said in the recording. If humanity is to be exterminated, we have decided that we will not die alone. We will take as many of you with us as possible. Mediator Celthus's face showed pure horror. You would destroy the entire galactic civilization rather than surrender one colony world? Morrison leaned back in his chair. We would prefer not to. We want peace. We have always wanted peace. But if peace is impossible, if our only choices are extinction or mutual destruction, we will choose mutual destruction every time. We will not go quietly into the darkness. Professor Kelthus stopped the recording again and looked at his students. Many of them seemed ill. Freeka's crystalline body had turned a dark, muddy color. Crix had wrapped his tentacles around himself protectively. The council debated for 6 hours, the professor said. Some members wanted to call the human bluff. Others argued that it clearly was not a bluff. The humans had demonstrated their capability and their willingness to do exactly what they threatened. But surely they would not actually do it. A student named Prill spoke up. Her feathered crest flattened against her head in distress. That would be insane. They would ensure their own destruction. That is what makes humans different from us, Professor Kelthus said quietly. Most species have a survival instinct that prevents such extreme actions. If you threaten a Vorlaxian with extinction, we will surrender and hope to rebuild later. If you threaten a Thalaxian, they will negotiate. If you threaten a Krelian, they will fight but accept defeat when it becomes inevitable. But humans have something we lack. They will accept their own extinction if it means their enemies also perish. He brought up psychological profiles of the human commanders. Commander Morrison underwent Council psychological evaluation after the conflict. The evaluators found that he was completely serious about his threats. He had truly been willing to destroy dozens of worlds and billions of lives. When asked if he felt any guilt about threatening so many innocent people, his response was simple. The recording showed Morrison in an interview room, speaking to a council psychologist. They were not innocent. Their governments were threatening to exterminate my species. Every person in those civilizations benefited from their government's actions. Every person was complicit. If stopping genocide against humanity required committing genocide against them, I was prepared to do that. The psychologist, a gentle Thalaxian named Vex, pressed him. But children would have died. Billions of children who had nothing to do with the conflict. Morrison's face remained emotionless, and 3 million humans would have died on New Terra, including over 1 million children. Why should their children be more valuable than ours? War is terrible, and innocents always suffer. If the galaxy was not prepared to accept human children dying, they should not have threatened us in the first place. Professor Kelthus turned off the recording. This interview was classified immediately. The council realized they were dealing with a species that had no moral limitations when they perceived an existential threat. Humans would sacrifice anything, destroy anything, kill anyone if they believed their species was in danger. Zorith spoke up, his voice shaking slightly. What happened next? Did the Draxians surrender? Did the council intervene? Both, Professor Kelthus said. The council forced the Draxians to withdraw from New Terra and pay reparations to humanity. But they also had to address the larger problem. Humans could never be allowed to participate in galactic warfare again. The display showed council debate footage, with representatives from dozens of species arguing frantically. Some wanted to quarantine humanity. Others suggested dismantling human military capabilities by force. A few even suggested a preemptive strike to eliminate the threat. But every military analyst came to the same conclusion, the professor said. Any attempt to disarm or attack humanity would result in exactly what Commander Morrison had threatened. The humans had prepared too well. They had hidden too many weapons, Justine. The next day, the lecture hall filled even faster than before. Word had spread through the academy about Professor Keltis's lesson on humans. Students who normally skipped classes arrived early to get good seats. The air buzzed with speculation and nervous energy. Professor Keltis noticed the crowd size but said nothing about it. He simply activated the displays and continued where he had left off. The image of Commander Jake Morrison appeared again, his calm face showing no emotion as he stood on the bridge of his ship. Day 4 of the border conflict, the professor began. The Draxian Empire was embarrassed. Their mighty fleet had failed to capture a handful of human ships. Worse, they were suffering losses to what they considered primitive tactics. Admiral Kreltok requested permission to use his elite forces. The display changed to show Draxian soldiers in heavy armor, their reptilian features hidden behind advanced combat helmets. These were not regular troops. These were the Strike Legion, the finest warriors the Draxian Empire had ever produced. The Strike Legion had fought in over 100 campaigns, Professor Keltis explained. They had never been defeated. They had never even been seriously challenged. Admiral Kreltok was certain they would end the human resistance in hours. Zoreth leaned forward, his forearms gripping the seat in front of him. He had studied the Strike Legion in his military history classes. They were legendary. Surely the humans could not stand against them. The Strike Legion deployed to New Terra's surface with 3,000 soldiers. The professor continued. They were met by human ground forces numbering only 800. The humans were led by 2 officers, Major Lisa Hayes and Captain Greg Turner. The display split to show both humans. Major Hayes was a woman with short blonde hair and sharp green eyes. Captain Turner was a man with dark skin and a scar across his left cheek. Both wore simple combat uniforms that looked almost primitive compared to Draxian armor. The Draxians expected traditional ground warfare, Professor Keltis said. They expected fortified positions, defensive lines, and honorable combat. What they found was something else entirely. The footage began to play and the students watched in growing horror. The human city was empty. No civilians, no soldiers, just abandoned streets and buildings. The Strike Legion advanced cautiously, their sensors sweeping for threats. Then the first building exploded. The blast caught an entire squad of Draxian soldiers, killing 12 instantly. Before the others could react, 3 more buildings detonated in sequence. The explosions were not random. They were timed perfectly to catch the Draxian forces as they tried to take cover. The humans had rigged their own city with explosives. Professor Keltis said quietly. They destroyed their own buildings, their own homes, just to kill enemy soldiers. This was their city, and they were willing to turn it into rubble if that meant victory. Vrika's crystalline form flickered with distress. Destroying your own territory was unthinkable. How could you claim victory if there was nothing left to defend? The footage continued. The Draxian forces advanced more carefully now, using scanners to detect explosives. But the humans had prepared for this too. The next attack came from the water system. Draxian soldiers began collapsing, their bodies convulsing as poison spread through their systems. The compound was harmless to humans, the professor explained. Their biology could process it without effect. But for Draxians, it caused severe illness. Not death usually, but enough to take soldiers out of combat. The humans had poisoned their own water supply. Captain Turner's voice came through the recording, giving orders to his troops. Section 4, fall back to secondary positions. Let them think they are winning. Then close the trap. The Draxian forces pushed deeper into the city, believing they were forcing the humans to retreat. They were wrong. The humans had created a maze of kill zones, each one designed to maximize casualties while minimizing their own risk. The humans used every advantage they could create, Professor Keltis said. They knew the terrain perfectly. They knew which buildings would collapse with minimal explosive. They knew which streets had the best sight lines for snipers. They had even studied Draxian psychology to predict how the enemy would respond to each attack. The footage showed human soldiers appearing and disappearing like ghosts. They would fire a few shots, kill or wound several Draxians, then vanish before return fire could reach them. They used the rubble of their destroyed city as cover, moving through passages they had prepared in advance. But what disturbed the watching students most was what happened next. A group of wounded Draxian soldiers called for medical assistance. A rescue team arrived, clearly marked with medical symbols. As they began treating the wounded, an entire section of street collapsed beneath them, dropping soldiers and medics into a prepared pit filled with sharpened metal spikes. Crix made a sound of disgust. They attacked medical personnel? That violates every rule of warfare. Professor Keltis nodded slowly. Yes, it does. When questioned later, Captain Turner said that anyone who came to help enemy soldiers was helping the enemy. In his view, medics were as valid a target as any soldier. The humans made no distinction between combatants and support personnel. Everyone wearing a Draxian uniform was an enemy to be eliminated. The battle raged for 6 hours. By the end, the Strike Legion had lost over 60% of its forces. The survivors retreated to their landing craft, many of them injured, all of them shaken. They had never faced anything like this before. The humans lost 140 soldiers, the professor said, less than 20% of their force. But the casualties were not what shocked the Galactic Council observers. It was the methods. The display showed intercepted human communications. Lieutenant Amy Clark was coordinating with Major Hayes, discussing their next moves. Her voice was calm, almost cheerful, as she suggested using captured Draxian communication codes to send false orders that would lead enemy troops into ambushes. The humans used psychological warfare, Professor Keltis explained. They broadcast sounds designed to disturb Draxian hearing. They sent fake surrender offers to lure enemies into traps. They even used the bodies of dead Draxian soldiers as bait, knowing that their comrades would try to recover them for proper burial. Another recording played, this one showing Commander Morrison speaking with his officers. They were discussing whether to target Draxian supply ships that had been marked as non-combatant vessels. They are bringing weapons and ammunition to the fleet, Jake Morrison said in the recording. That makes them part of the military operation. We will destroy them. One of his officers, a woman named Nicole Price, asked about civilian crew members on those ships. Morrison's response was cold and simple. They chose to serve the war effort. They accepted the risk. The students watched as human fighters attacked the supply vessels. 3 ships were destroyed, killing over 200 crew members, most of them civilians working routine transport jobs. Professor Keltis stopped the footage. Admiral Kreltok was furious. He contacted the Galactic Council and demanded that the humans be charged with war crimes. The Council agreed to investigate. But before they could act, Admiral Kreltok made a threat that changed everything. The display showed the Draxian Admiral, his scaled face twisted with anger. If the humans will not fight with honor, then we will not either. We will bombard New Terra from orbit. We will destroy every city, every human installation, every trace of their presence on that world. The students understood the implication. Orbital bombardment was the ultimate military action, used only in the most extreme circumstances. It meant killing everyone on the planet, military and civilian alike. The Galactic Council immediately moved to stop this, Professor Keltis said. They contacted Commander Morrison and told him he must surrender to prevent the destruction of New Terra. They expected him to accept. No species would sacrifice an entire colony world rather than surrender. The display showed Commander Morrison's face as he received the message. He listened carefully, his expression never changing. Then he asked for 20 minutes to consider the terms. What the Council did not know, Professor Keltis said softly, was that during those 20 minutes Commander Morrison was not considering surrender. He was preparing something that would terrify the entire galaxy. The professor looked around at his students. Many of them seemed confused. How could a defeated commander prepare anything in just 20 minutes? Lieutenant Amy Clark had not been idle during the conflict, Professor Keltis explained. While the fighting continued, she had sent out small, hidden human ships to 30 different systems. Those ships carried no weapons. They carried something far more dangerous, information and intent. The display showed star maps with highlighted systems. The students recognized many of them. They were major colony worlds belonging to various species, including some council member species. The humans had identified strategic targets across the galaxy, the professor said. Not military targets, civilian targets, population centers, major cities, places where billions lived in peace, far from any war zone. Vrika's form flickered rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. Surely they would not attack civilians. That would be genocide. Professor Keltis's expression was grim. That is exactly what made the humans so dangerous. The lecture hall on Vardos Prime was massive, with seats arranged in circular tiers that rose toward the domed ceiling. Students from across the galaxy filled the space, their various forms creating a patchwork of colors and shapes. Some had scales, others had fur. and a few existed as energy beings contained in specialized suits. They all shared one thing in common. They were the best military students their species had to offer. Professor Kelthus stood at the center of the room, his tall Vorlaxian frame casting long shadows across the floor. His silver skin reflected the lights from the holographic displays that floated around him. He had taught military history for 300 years, but today's lesson always made him uncomfortable. The room quieted as he activated the main display. A single word appeared in the universal language. Humans. A ripple of whispers spread through the audience. Zorath, a young Krelian with dark blue scales and forearms, leaned forward in his seat. He had heard stories about humans, strange tales that seemed too wild to be true. Next to him, his friend Vrika shifted her crystalline body, the light refracting through her in nervous patterns. Today we discuss the most unusual restriction in Galactic Council history, Professor Kelthus began, his voice carrying easily through the space. You all know the rules of galactic warfare. You have studied the treaties, the honor codes, and the acceptable methods of combat. But there is one species that is forbidden from participating in any military conflict whatsoever. Another student, a Thalaxian named Crix, raised one of his tentacles. Professor, are you speaking of the humans? I have heard they were too primitive for modern warfare. Professor Kelthus made a sound that might have been a laugh, but there was no humor in it. That is what we tell the public, yes. It is easier than the truth. He tapped a control on his wrist, and the display changed to show a blue and green planet. This is Earth, the human homeworld. They made first contact with us in the year 2157 by their calendar. The image shifted to show humans for the first time. Many students had never seen one before. They looked fragile with their soft skin and small frames. They had only 2 arms and 2 legs, and they moved with an odd grace that seemed almost awkward, compared to more advanced species. They seemed so weak, Vrika whispered to Zorath. They established peaceful relations quickly, the professor continued. They were eager to trade, to learn, to join the galactic community. We welcomed them. They built colonies on 7 worlds within 2 years. Everything seemed normal. The display now showed human cities on various planets, beautiful structures that blended their architecture with alien landscapes. The students saw humans working alongside other species, sharing meals, learning together. In 2159, a minor territorial dispute arose between the human colony of New Terra and the Draxian Empire. It was nothing unusual. Such conflicts happen regularly between species. The Galactic Council expected to mediate, perhaps award the territory to one side or the other. And everyone would move on. Professor Kelthus paused, and his skin darkened slightly, a sign of distress among his people. What happened next changed everything we thought we knew about warfare. He brought up a new image showing military vessels. The Draxian Empire sent a fleet of 80 ships to enforce their claim. This was standard procedure. They expected the humans to either negotiate or surrender. The human defense force consisted of only 12 ships. Crix made a clicking sound of confusion. Surely the humans requested aid from the council. They did not, Professor Kelthus said quietly. They chose to fight. The room filled with murmurs of surprise. Fighting against such odds was considered honorable but foolish. Most species would have recognized the impossible situation and sought diplomatic solutions. The Draxian commander was Admiral Kreltok, a veteran of 40 campaigns. He had never lost a battle. He sent a message to the human commander, offering generous terms of surrender. The human commander was named Jake Morrison, a male of only 32 years. By human standards, he was barely an adult. By our standards, he was an infant. The display showed Commander Morrison's image. He had short brown hair and calm brown eyes. He wore a simple uniform with few decorations. Nothing about him suggested he was anything special. Commander Morrison sent a 2-word reply to Admiral Kreltok's generous offer, Professor Kelthus said. The words appeared on the display in human English, then translated, "Not yet." Several students made sounds of approval. At least these humans had spirit, even if they were doomed. The first battle lasted 4 hours, the professor explained as battle footage began to play. The humans lost 3 ships immediately. Their weapons were weaker, their shields less effective. The Draxians damaged 5 more human vessels. By all military calculations, the conflict should have ended there. The footage showed the 9 remaining human ships retreating. The Draxian fleet began to pursue, confident in their victory. But then something strange happened, Professor Kelthus said. and his voice carried a tone the students had never heard from him before. It sounded like fear. The human ships did not flee to safety. They scattered throughout the system in patterns that made no sense. When the Draxians tried to corner them, the humans were never where they should be. The tactical display showed the Draxian fleet dividing to chase the human vessels. Each time they got close, the humans would disappear, only to reappear somewhere unexpected. Over the next 18 hours, the humans attacked 7 supply stations, destroyed 4 communication arrays, and damaged 16 support vessels. They never engaged the main Draxian battle fleet directly. Admiral Kreltok called it cowardice. He was wrong. Zorath felt a chill run through his body. This was not how warfare worked. Honorable combat involved facing your enemy directly, testing strength against strength. What the humans were doing sounded like hunting. The humans had a tactical officer named Amy Clark. Professor Kelthis continued. She was 28 years old. She coordinated every attack with precision that our best strategists found remarkable. But it was not her skill that disturbed the observers from the Galactic Council. It was her targets. The display showed Lieutenant Clark, a human female with red hair tied back from her face. She looked even less threatening than Commander Morrison. She did not target warships. She targeted food supplies, medical stations, engineering crews. She aimed to make the Draxian fleet unable to function, not unable to fight. Within 30 hours, the Draxians were running low on basic supplies. Their ships were breaking down. Their crews were exhausted. Professor Kelthis looked around the room at his students. And then the humans did something that should have been impossible. They began adapting Draxian technology to their own use. The room fell silent. Adapting alien technology typically took years of research and testing. The professor brought up new footage showing human engineers working frantically inside captured Draxian equipment. A human engineer named Paul Grant led the effort. He had no formal military training. Before the war, he designed farming equipment. In less than 2 days, he and his team reverse-engineered Draxian shield frequencies and weapon systems. Vrika's crystal body flickered with confusion. How is that possible? Professor Kelthis looked at her directly. That is the question the Galactic Council asked. That is the question we have been asking for 200 years. The answer is what makes humans the most forbidden species in galactic warfare. He deactivated the display, leaving the room in relative darkness. This is only the beginning of the story. What happened next convinced the Council that humanity could never be allowed to participate in galactic conflicts. Not because they were too weak, but because they were too dangerous. The students sat in stunned silence trying to process what they had learned. These small, fragile humans had somehow turned a hopeless battle into something that frightened the entire galaxy. Professor Kelthis's final words echoed through the chamber. Tomorrow we will continue. You will learn why the most peaceful species in the galaxy is also the most terrifying.